中国人有句俗语叫落叶归根。In China, there's an old saying, the dead should be buried at home. But 1,000 miles away from China, in a corner of an English cemetery, I found 6 lonely Chinese graves. Who are they? Why are they buried here? And why didn't they return home? I meet with Steve Lau, who's been looking into the history of the Chinese Labour Corps.
The men buried here are members of the Chinese Labour Corps who were recruited by the British during the First World War from northeast China. And unfortunately, these men were ill and so went to hospital. So they never quite got to France, which was their final destination, where they would have worked for the British. After the Battle of the Somme, when so many British soldiers died, that the British really decided they needed more manpower. So they turned to China because they had the largest population in the world, but also Chinese had a reputation for being able to work very hard. There is one estimate. For the 100,000 Chinese labourers, the British were able to release 150,000 soldiers to fight.
And what kind of jobs are these labourers do?
They do all sorts of jobs, from quite technical jobs, so they were repairing and maintaining the tanks during the First World War. They built roads and railways. About 2,500 were operating the railways across the Western Front. But any kind of job, so they were filling sandbags. Some of them worked in forestry, even making charcoal, which was very important because it kept troops warm in the trenches. But of course they were clearing the battlefields after the war, which was very dangerous work. So
Very dangerous.
Because,
How dangerous is that?
because they were moving a lot of the unexploded munitions and even hand grenades. They didn't know what they were sometimes and would pull the pin, and so they would die from the explosions. They believed they were going simply as workers to work, and the war was the context, but it wasn't where they would be working, and that's what their contract said. They would be at least 10 miles away from the fighting.
So was it true? Was it really 10 miles away?
It wasn't 10 miles away, and especially after China joined the war, they were really very close to the fighting. And even if it was 10 miles away, they were always in range of aerial bombardment.
How did the Chinese get on with the British soldiers they had to work alongside with? John DeLucy, perhaps the only living British person who has any connection with the Chinese Labour Corps today. I visit him at his home in Kent.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Nice to meet you. My name is Bruce.
I'm John. Come in, please.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to show you some photographs of my great-grandfather.
John's family lived in China for more than 70 years. He tells me how his grandfather was involved in bringing the Chinese workers to Britain.
My grandfather was an officer in the Chinese Labour Corps, and my family lived in China for some 70 years. So luckily, in retirement, I've now discovered all these Chinese photographs.
You have some collections that can represent the Chinese Labour Corps. So what are these collections?
The best quality photographs are on glass slides. Everyday scenarios where the Chinese Labour Corps people are doing work. Quite a lot of slides of them having health checks. The Chinese Labour Corps were very susceptible to conjunctivitis and trachoma. Quite a few of the camps themselves, both tented camps and camps where they had constructed huts. Quite a lot of the Chinese Labour Corps people dismantling ammunition. Clearly, life was tough for both the Chinese and the English, but the impression I got was that quite a lot of them are looking relatively happy. Clearly, it must have been quite a shock for them to come to France from Shandong, but they looked very strong people who still kept their culture. The kite flying competitions, the strong arm competitions. There's a lovely one of a Chinese man with a canary feeding it from his mouth, for instance. So I know those kinds of little touches helped keep the Chinese feeling, happy. That's the box. And then just in the corner, Chinese Labour Corps, which is what attracted my attention. Having had these slides for 40 years, I've never looked at them, but because I found it was the Chinese Labour Corps, I then opened it up, and you can see they were the largest Labour Corps, as far as I'm aware, in the First World War, and the story has not been told. So if we can get a memorial up in London to the Chinese Labour Corps who helped the British win the First World Wars, that would be great.
The memorial we plan to build is a traditional Chinese architectural feature called a Huabiao. The current proposal is for the memorial to be built on that planted bit of land there. Should you have a look? Yeah. It's a stone marble column which will be 9.6 metres tall. It will face east directly to the city of Jinan, which is the capital of Shandong province. A Huabiao is a traditional Chinese architectural feature, so it's representative of China. It has some significant symbolic meaning. So there's a dragon which curls around the column, and more than halfway along the column there's a cloud. And on the very top there's a small dragon. And the traditional feature of this dragon in Chinese culture is to communicate the feelings of people to heaven. So we just felt it was an appropriate memorial for those labourers.
So why did you choose Elephant Castle?
Well, Elephant Castle, in a sense, is not special, but that's exactly what we were looking for. We were looking for a location which wasn't particularly special, that everyday people would just be going about their normal business and see the Huabiao and wonder what it was. So they'd come over, have a look, and learn something about the Chinese Labour Corps. The memorial, as the name suggests, is to remember and to raise awareness of the contribution of the members of the Chinese Labour Corps, which since the end of the First World War were largely forgotten. So it's bringing them back into the frame, back into the narrative.